I never thought I could fall in love with someone who already belonged to someone else. Every night, exactly at 11 p.m., the warm yellow light from the apartment next door turns on. A small, simple act, but to me, it feels like a quiet invitation. As if he's saying, "I'm still here. Are you watching?" For 3 years, I've lived alone on the 4th floor, and for 3 years, I've quietly watched the man next door live a life of silence. No laughter, no late-night arguments. Just him, sitting by the window, reading books under the soft glow of that lamp, sometimes playing old jazz records that drift through the thin walls, and always ending the night with a long stare into the dark sky. I don't know when it started, this quiet affection. Maybe after the fleeting elevator rides, or the subtle scent of his coffee that lingered in the hallway each morning. Maybe after hearing his piano echo through the walls on lazy Sunday afternoons. I know he's married. I know this feeling shouldn't exist. But if we could choose who to fall for, I wouldn't be writing this story. By the time I turned 30, solitude had become both a comfort and a shield. I worked as a freelance illustrator, spending most of my days wrapped in quiet, sketching at my desk by the window, sipping lukewarm tea, and watching the world blur past my 4th floor apartment in the city. It wasn't loneliness, not exactly. Just silence. A silence I had chosen. That was until he became part of my everyday. He lived right next door. Our balconies separated only by a thin divider and a few potted plants I never had the heart to water. I never knew his name. Not really. Just glimpses. The mail on his doormat, initials scribbled on a package, a murmured "good evening" in the elevator. He was the kind of man who didn't take up space, but still managed to draw your attention. Not flashy, just present. He always came home late, sometimes close to midnight. His key would turn in the lock, and a second later, his apartment would glow, soft, golden, inviting. I never meant to watch, but I did. Most nights, he would sit in the armchair by the window, a book in his lap, and a cup of something steaming in his hand. The way he read, so still and focused, made me wonder what kind of world he escaped to in those pages. Occasionally, I'd hear faint jazz music trickling through the wall between us, soft saxophones, slow pianos, notes lingering in the air like questions without answers. I noticed he never laughed, never talked on the phone, never had friends. Over. And his wife, well, I only saw her once. She passed by me in the hallway without a glance, her face expressionless, her steps cold. After that, I began to wonder if the light in his window was the only warmth he had left. We crossed paths now and then, brief moments in the elevator, a nod on rainy mornings, a polite half-smile in the lobby. He had the kind of eyes that held stories, quiet storms tucked behind long days and tired sighs. Eyes that looked like they were waiting for something, or maybe someone. I told myself not to read too much into it. That he was just a neighbor, a man who liked to read, a shadow in a well-lit room. But deep down, I knew. From the way my heart skipped when our eyes met, to the nights I found myself waiting by the window, hoping his light would flick on. I knew. And yet, I also knew. He wasn't mine to hope for. It started as a quiet curiosity. Every night, without meaning to, I began to glance at the clock around 10:55 p.m., just a few minutes before the familiar glow would return to the window. Next door, it wasn't intentional at first. Just a momentary flicker of interest. But soon, it became a ritual. My own secret countdown. 11 o'clock. Light on. Heart still. There was something oddly comforting about knowing he was there, just a few feet away, behind that thin wall. In a city that moved too fast and spoke too loudly, he existed like a pause, a still point. I started leaving my own light on longer than I used to, hoping, maybe foolishly, that he'd notice it too. The feelings didn't crash in like a wave. They crept in softly, like the scent of morning coffee drifting through the hallway before sunrise. I would wake early some days just to catch that scent. Rich, warm, familiar. It must have been his, brewing from the corner kitchen I imagined behind his walls. I would close my eyes and picture him sipping it slowly, standing barefoot, on the cold tile floor, still half asleep. Then there was the music. Some evenings, when the world outside grew too heavy, I'd hear the faint notes of a piano, sometimes melancholic, sometimes sweet, always imperfect. It didn't come from a speaker. I could tell. The rhythm faltered in places, the tempo changed as if played by memory instead of sheet music. He wasn't a pianist, not professionally, but he played like someone who felt too much and said too little. I never once knocked on his door. I never followed the music to its source. But I listened, every note sinking into me like a secret. Our eyes met more often, too. Just little moments, shared glances when we passed each other in the stairwell or outside the building on a windy morning. Once, he held the elevator door for me, and our fingers brushed as I stepped in. He didn't pull his hand away quickly. Neither did I. We didn't say much, just a quiet thank you and a polite nod. But it lingered. The warmth, the awareness. I should have stopped myself then. Every reasonable part of me knew the boundaries. I knew he had a wife, that there were rings and vows and a shared name on a mailbox. But sometimes love, or something dangerously close to it, blooms in silence. It finds its way through cracks we never meant to leave open. He never gave me a reason to fall for him. He didn't flirt, didn't cross lines. He was kind but distant, gentle but guarded. And maybe that's what made my feelings harder to contain, because they weren't built on fantasy. They were built on fragments, on coffee, music, and the sadness in his eyes when he thought no one was watching. I began to write again, more than I had in years. Stories about unnamed men and longing women, about windows that glowed and hearts that couldn't speak. He had become my muse, unknowingly. And still, I told no one. How could I? How do you confess to falling for a man who isn't yours? How do you explain the ache of something that never even began? So I kept it all inside. The waiting, the listening, the hoping. And every night, I sat by my window and watched the light return. Not for me. Not really. I hated myself for it. Not the feelings exactly. Because how can you hate something that grows so quietly, so gently? But I hated what those feelings meant. The weight of them. The shame. The slow ache of knowing that what you want is something you're never allowed to have. Some nights I tried to pull away. I'd draw the curtains before the clock struck 11, bury myself in work, or force sleep with herbal tea and noise-canceling headphones. But my heart was a traitor. It listened for footsteps in the hallway. It waited for the creak of the door, next door. It imagined him sitting there, in that golden light, and I'd feel hollow inside. This is wrong, I whispered to myself like a prayer. Stop. But I didn't. Then one evening, everything shifted. It was almost 9 p.m. when I heard the knock, a soft, tentative sound against my door. I wasn't expecting anyone. I hesitated, heart suddenly racing. When I opened it, he was standing there, just like that, closer than I had ever seen him before. Up close, he looked tired, not messy or broken, just worn out, like someone carrying too much for too long. "Hi," he said, voice low. "Sorry to bother you. My flashlight stopped working. Do you happen to have batteries?" I nodded. Too fast, too eager. "Yeah. Give me a second." As I turned away to grab the pack from my kitchen drawer, my hands trembled. I hated how excited I felt, how alive. And when I handed them to him, our fingers brushed again. Longer this time. "Thanks," he said, offering a small, grateful smile. "You saved me." I wanted to ask why he needed the flashlight. I wanted to ask 100 things. But all I could do was smile back and whisper, "No problem." That moment changed. Everything. And nothing. After that night, we started talking more often. Casual things at first. The weather. The building's poor heating. A book recommendation here and there. Our conversations were always brief, always polite. But they began to grow, stretching just a little longer each time. He never mentioned his wife. I never asked. And still, I saw the ring on his finger every time. A quiet reminder. We never crossed the line. Not really. Our words stayed safe. Our bodies never touched beyond those fleeting brushes of hands. But emotionally, we were dancing in a dangerous place. Some days I would catch myself smiling at the sound of his voice echoing faintly through the hallway. Other times, I'd stare at my own reflection and wonder when I had become the kind of woman who waited by her door for borrowed moments that didn't belong to her. I told myself it wasn't real, that he was just being neighborly, that maybe I was projecting too much. But I saw the way his eyes softened when he looked at me. I felt the shift in his tone when he said my name. We never talked late into the night. We never shared secrets or leaned in too close. But there was an undercurrent. Unspoken, electric, undeniable. And it was killing me. Because every time he walked back into his apartment, closing the door behind him, the silence hit harder. Every time I heard his footsteps fade away, I felt the weight of the wall between us like 1,000 bricks pressing against my chest. I wanted more, but I also wanted to be good. And those two wants, they couldn't live in the same heart. There are moments in life that feel like turning points. Quiet, yet irreversible. Moments when the truth, once spoken, cannot be taken back. His came on an ordinary Tuesday, over something as simple as returning a book I had lent him. He stood at my door again, like he had a few times before, holding the worn paperback between his fingers. His smile was tired, his eyes a little softer than usual. "I finished it," he said, holding it out to me. It reminded me of silence. I smiled. That's what I liked about it. He didn't leave right away. Instead, he lingered by the door frame, eyes drifting past me, into the quiet warmth of my apartment. And then, as if the words had been weighing on him for far too long, he let them go. "She's been away," he said quietly. "My wife. She works overseas now. Long assignments. We barely talk." I didn't move. I didn't speak. I just listened, because that's what he needed. "She left 4 months ago," he continued, voice low. "Before that, we were just coexisting. No fights, no passion, just silence. Like two strangers waiting for something to end." I felt the weight of his words settle into the air between us, heavy and undeniable. A part of me had suspected. The absence, the loneliness in his eyes. It all made sense now. But knowing didn't make it easier. In fact, it made everything hurt more. Because now, I understood. He wasn't just distant. He was quietly breaking. And somehow, so was I. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, listening to the rain tapping softly against the window, and replayed every word he had said, every silence we had shared, every moment that had built towards something neither of us could fully name. I told myself not to hope, that his confession wasn't an invitation, that broken marriages didn't give birth to fairy tales. But then came the knock. It was almost midnight. The rain had turned heavy, slanting across the balcony like silver threads. I hesitated, heart pounding, and opened the door. He was there, soaked through, rain dripping from his hair, clinging to the collar of his coat. He looked lost, breathless, like he'd run 1,000 miles just to stand at my door. "I'm sorry," he said. "I know it's late." I nodded slowly, unsure what to say. My voice caught in my throat. He looked at me, and this time, he didn't try to hide the pain in his eyes. I didn't know where else to go," he said softly. "I don't want anything from you. I need someone to listen. Just tonight." My breath trembled. He wasn't asking for love. He wasn't asking for a promise. Just presence. Just kindness. I stepped aside. He walked in slowly, dripping water onto the wooden floor. He didn't reach for me. He didn't say another word. He just stood there in the silence of my apartment, his breathing slowing, his shoulders finally beginning to drop. I made tea. He sat on the couch, eyes distant. I handed him the warm cup, and we said nothing for a long while. Sometimes, being close to someone isn't about touch. It's about holding space for their pain. It's about sitting with the storm, rather than running from it. That night, he didn't sleep with me. He didn't even stay long. But when he left, something between us had shifted, irrevocably. I was no longer just the woman who watched his light from afar. I was now the person who saw him. Really. Saw him, and I knew. The closer we got, the more it would hurt. Love, I've come to learn, isn't always about holding on. Sometimes, it's about knowing when to let go. The morning after he came to me, I woke with a strange calmness. There was no rush of excitement, no lingering warmth, just clarity. Quiet voice inside me whispering what I had known all along. This wasn't my story to finish. Not here. Not with him. I could still feel the echo of his presence in my apartment, the faint scent of rain, the untouched teacup on the counter, and with it, the weight of everything we hadn't said. He was lonely. I was longing. But longing was not love, and loneliness was not a foundation. He had a life he hadn't yet left behind, a promise made long before me. And while I had become a part of his silence, I couldn't be the reason it broke. So I wrote him a letter, just a few lines, trembling with truth I couldn't say out loud. I like you, more than I should. But I can't let this feeling become something that hurts others, or ourselves. You need to find your way, and I need to find mine. Take care. I slipped it under his door at dawn, and by the time the city stirred awake, I was already gone. No goodbye, no last look. Just a quiet ending to a silent love. Not because I didn't care, but because I finally cared enough to walk away. Years passed. Life moved forward with its quiet, inevitable rhythm. Cities changed, seasons shifted, and the pain that once felt so sharp slowly softened into memory. She built a new life, different, quieter, but hers. There were no grand romances, no epic heartbreaks. Just mornings filled with light, plants by the window, and a steady kind of peace that came from learning to love her own company. Then one rainy evening, as she was sorting through old emails, a new message appeared in her inbox. The sender's name made her breath catch. "It's been a long time," the message began. "I don't know if this will ever reach you, but I needed to say thank you." He wrote of how much her kindness had meant to him back then, how her silence had spoken louder than any demand ever could, how he eventually found the courage to end a marriage that had long since faded, and how, through the years, he often thought of her not with regret, but with deep gratitude. "I hope you are happy, truly, peacefully." She read it twice, then again, and then she smiled. Not with sadness, not with longing, just warmth. She set down her cup of tea and turned toward the window. The street below was quiet. Across the way, another window glowed with soft yellow light, like his used to. She was still living alone, still listening to the night. But now, the stillness no longer felt empty. It felt complete. Because sometimes, the greatest love story isn't the one that ends in forever. It's the one that taught you how to begin again. Sometimes love doesn't need to end in holding hands or shared futures. Sometimes it's simply about understanding when to stay and when to let go. She never got the fairy tale ending, but she got something deeper. Self-respect, clarity, and the quiet kind of strength that blooms in solitude. And in the end, maybe that was a kind of love story, just one where the love was redirected inward. Because true love isn't just about finding the right person. It's also about becoming the right version of yourself. If this story touched your heart in any way, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to Sweet Love Stories. Every week, we bring you soulful stories that explore love, loss, healing, and hope. Hit the bell icon so you never miss a moment of connection. And remember, you deserve a love that feels like peace. We'll see you in the next story.